Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me? Could I ask you if you wouldn't mind all standing, and we'll welcome the Mayor of Macroom and our guest of honour this evening, John A. Murphy. Mayor Bala, last Mayor Kunte, Takti Publi, as Guinea Ushla. Bola Mardus Falta Kurosha, Goody and Credu Specialta, the Corla Bala Macruma, and Sean Noct. Mayor, Deputy County Mayor, public representatives, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all here to Macroom Town Hall this evening for a very special meeting of Macroom Town Council to confer the freedom of the town of Macroom on Professor John A. Murphy, Emeritus Professor of Irish History from UCC. Now, there is actually a formal council meeting this, so there's a few little protocols we'll have to go through. The first order of business I'll do is to open the meeting, and I will be calling a roll call of all the members of Macroom Town Council, so it's a little bit like roll at school again for a minute. I will be calling the councillors in the order of election. So firstly, Councillor Lucy, Councillor Coonahan, Councillor Foley, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Coughlin, Councillor Cullinan McCarthy, Councillor McSweeney, Councillor O'Connell, Councillor Kingston. Okay, present and correct. Next we have the form of the citation, and if you'll just bear with me a second. In a few moments this will be the scroll that the Mayor will be presenting to John A. To award him the freedom. So what I'm reading you is from this scroll here. At a meeting of Macroom Town Council held in the Council Chamber Town Hall, Macroom, on Tuesday the 23rd of May 2006, it was unanimously agreed that the freedom of the town of Macroom be conferred on Professor John A. Murphy in recognition of his national and international contribution to historical scholarship, in recognition of his contribution to Irish public life, in recognition of his love and commitment to his native town in Macroom, and as a token of the high esteem and affection in which he is held in this town. For all this and more, the Mayor and members of Macroom Town Council consider him worthy to be enrolled in the role of honorary citizens, and so direct. I would now ask you to welcome the Mayor of Macroom, Councillor Connie Foley, to say a few words, and then to formally present the Certificate of Freedom to Professor Murphy. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Tom Clark. I'm not as tall as you, fellow councillors, Deputy Mayor of Cork County, public representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Town Hall for the conferring of the freedom of the town on Professor John A. Murphy. At the outset, I would like to make it known that it was actually my cousin, Councillor Tom Coonan, the former Mayor, who was to the forefront of the proposal to grant John A. this honour. Macroom Town Council has in its existence over the last 100 years and more only bestowed the freedom of the town on one other individual. The rarity of the award is a reflection of its importance and also of the esteem in which we hold John A. in his native town. The scroll that I will be presenting shortly refers to John A.'s contributions to historical scholarship and Irish public life. Just as important to me as Mayor of the town is his championing of his native place. You might say that you can take the man out of Macroom, but not the Macroom out of the man. It is entirely fitting that the town of Macroom honours one of its most notable sons. For all his contributions that have enriched our lives, whether as a teacher, lecturer, historian, politician and singer, we salute you this evening a true Macrompian. I'd just like to finish with a few Johnny A's own words, and it kind of goes like this, and the more I've read this, the more it sinks it sinks into my head, and the more I find it very interesting. Impugn my scholarship, if you will, challenge my political motivations, spread scandal about my private life, even pollute my pint. But at your greatest peril, accuse me of going flat. Johnny A, I've never heard you utter a flat note. Now, as Mayor of Macroom, or I suppose to be more correct, as Macrompian to Macrompian, I would ask you to join me and accept the presentation of the Certificate of Freedom, and also to sign the Roll of Freedom of the town of Macroom. Thanks very much.
Sign there. That concludes that part of the formalities. And next, and without further ado, and without any further introduction, the man himself, Professor John A. Murphy.
Well, Mr. Mayor, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing I want to do is to thank the council for this great honour, and I'll come back to that again in a moment, but also to thank everybody here for coming. And I'm particularly happy to welcome my own family, my wife and my family, and if I may say so, the two elders of the tribe, my brother Tig and Canon Seamus Corkery. Who constitute an incentive to the rest of us to keep going until we reach their eminent stage, and beyond indeed, per ardua ad astra, or whatever. But while I'm at the Sachbare, Lord yn Wailing, ni le breg o mos na del o mos dan cúpla focal, ach tuisgur bhíon Gailing tanga arsa an dúig seo. Agus le lígan móige, bhí crut agus blas na Gailinge caint na nína an sa, agus I the Lord Berle. Bhí Gailtocht músgrí a bhad níos cóngaríd an bhela ná mar a tániuh, agus gach lá énig go mór mhór, bhí Gailing le clás go tíanta ó bhainte na tútha in ír. Is cuinlam go dagach bert drahar col cahracha ma bháthar iste goríilta go dtí an éanach chun a gnó dhéanamh agus chun cuarda thuirt ma bháthar comma. Bhín iad Timo sé as lis Caragán agus a grahar Dennis ó dangan na Salach agus is Gailing fada bhí go siúlacha caintóirí dúcha siad bert. Agus tá Gailing fitte fúte le star á túl na háte seo, leis an méliadas, leis le áing an taláin, Misha an salán fada firn in is an taum cáil an duine. Le áráníocht, le filíocht, le filíocht mar a bhuiine léire, le gascíocht artí léire, mar is an sohíos ar a gceanóg sa bhíon 67 a chuir eilíon dofnaí conal a súil artá léire don céadúir, fé mar a insin si doing sa chuoine, gur thug si ar a súil agus tanmh a crí don gascíoch. Agus béidir go raibh sí láthair nuair íon sé an gasca mór úr sé sin léimt in orda ar clíthán barala, scara cosach agus a bhfuil leis síos ón ceanóg le fána síos drochad seáda caiisteán go dtíon drochad. Agus is an só chomá a hagach a tháinig an tathair pald an céadúr ar scoil, an céad bhuascrín óir don nuag réling. Mar sin, mar a deirem tá áid fit a fúte leis an tanga, agus bheadh sé nárach uimse dá ligging fallíar sin, dá ligging an ócáid seo haram gan cultúr sin sir, a thuairt chun cuine le meas agus le gceann. And I have no intention of translating all that into English, partly because, what I do want to say is that I felt on this historic occasion, for me anyway, that it needed more than the ritual cúpla focal. It required me, I think, to call to mind in the ancestral language the heritage of this countryside. But I have to watch my time. I'm down to speak for 20 minutes. You can time it later on. But I hope I won't get carried away because my natural instinct is to speak for as long as Fidel Castro in his prime or one of the Redemptorist preachers of my boyhood. This fine town hall, over a century old now, has nostalgic associations for me and for many of my generation. The dances, the pantomimes, the travelling plays, the travelling fit-ups, and so on. My mother used to play the piano here for the local talent at concerts. And one of my earliest memories is Sunday night visits with my mother over to my maternal grandparents across the square there, John and Mary O'Shea, and hearing the dance music drifting across the hall where we sat in the dark, I well remember, in the sitting room, and hearing the popular dance tunes of the time, the Isle of Capri, Red Sails in the Sunset, and so on, being played by Paddy Foley and his family. And this is an interesting link as well, that Connie, his grandson, is the mayor tonight, who so graciously welcomed me. And another link, my grandfather, John O'Shea, was chairman of Macroom Urban Council at least once, if not more, in the early 20th century. And yet another town hall memory for me is, as a 10-year-old perhaps, being intoxicated by the passionate politics of the period, the blue shirts and Dev's visit to town and dark, hungry faces out there in the square, and intoxicated myself by that passion, and going out on the balcony and addressing a small and amused audience on what, I don't know, but it was obviously an invitation of the oratory of the period. And that would suddenly be concluded because my mother would dispatch my big sister to drag me down and not to be making an exhibition of myself. That was one of the great phrases of enjoining proper conduct in my boyhood. Don't be making an exhibition of yourself. And that leads me to the fact that this town hall has successfully seen in recent years people making an exhibition of themselves, sculptors and artists who, under the patronage of the town council, have got an opportunity to exhibit their work. And I had the good fortune to be associated with that for the last year or two. And that's a great thing and a new thing, that the town council should be a patron of the visual arts. And public appreciation of the visual arts will increase accordingly as this goes on. And that's one of the great developments of our time. And so the town that ringingly affirmed that it never reared a fool will soon be able to boast that it never reared a Philistine. And my brother Tig's presence here reminds me that of yet another link with the town hall, that he was one of the first, if not the first, class held here when the secondary school came to Macroom, before the building was completed over in what was called the Cannon's Field. The classes were held here in the town hall. 1933. I'll be consulting you later on about other points. Some years ago, I was supervising a postgraduate student, and eventually his material was published, and he asked me to launch the book. And I already had him years before that as a secondary student. So it was a double kind of link there. And he was a quite retiring person. And anyway, I launched the book, and he wrote something in it. And when I looked to see what he wrote, he had simply written down, "To John A. Murphy, teacher." And I was very moved by the simplicity of that. And it made me realize, I think, that I always had wanted to be a teacher and communicator from the very beginning. And so tonight, next to invoking the memory of my beloved parents, I would like to salute the teachers that I had, that I was fortunate enough to have, both at primary and secondary level. And I'm only going to mention one teacher's name because it would be invidious and boring to start picking out individual names. But certainly the first influence on me was Paddy Desmond, member of a highly respected teaching clan, who on Wednesday afternoons in 4th class national school would put aside the timetable, perch himself high on a desk facing us, and launch into stories about characters and events associated with familiar landscapes, with the local landscapes we all knew. And of course, that is what made them riveting. That he wasn't talking in the abstract about Brian Boru or some other national hero, but about people who had lived in the places that we knew so well, villains and heroes. And for me, at any rate, that kindled the very first fires of my historical imagination. I suppose I was maybe 10 years old at that time. So he would evoke the Battle of Balaclachta, the conflict between Bishop MacEgan and Lord Brahil in the town park, the coming of Cardinal Rinuccini as papal legate to the Confederate Catholics in the 1640s. And years afterwards, I studied or came to read the official account in Latin of Rinuccini's visit. And he landed in Kinmare and proceeded, I suppose, northeast to Macroom, where he stayed 4 days in the castle, which was then, of course, in the possession of the McCarthy's, Viscount Muskerry. And when I came to read, as I say, long years after being with Paddy Desmond, when I came to read what was grandly called the Commentarius Rinuccinianus, that is a commentary on Rinuccini's journey, I was delighted to see Macroom being mentioned there. And the Latin phrase somehow made it seem very important. Macromia emporium muscriae. And all it meant prosaically was Macroom, the market town of Musgrave. But for me, the difference between Emporium and Imperium was a trifle. So I was greatly taken with this kind of ringing phrase. And I was in the Honan Hostel at the time, now demolished, in UCC. And I would go around the corridors shouting out, Macromia, Emporium, Musgrave, greatly to the envy and annoyance of people who came from towns that had no importance at all. And so I realized the force of what St. Paul meant when he boasted, I am Saul of Tarsus, a man of no mean city. And then Paddy Desmond would also tell us about Sir William Penn coming back from the West Indies, taking up his, not his rightful, but his usurped position with the eviction of the McCarthy's in the 1650s. And he came into the town of Macroom with an exotic revenue from the West Indies, bringing with him a parrot and a Jamaican manservant. The first black man to be seen in Macroom, without a doubt. And you can only imagine the excitement and exclamations from over the half doors as he came up to town. And he would tell us, Paddy would tell us about gallant Arthur O'Leary and his nemesis Abraham Morris, the infamous Malachy Duggan, the murder of Colonel Hutchinson in Coldrum House, and the feats of Sean Rua, the Goira outlaw, and so on. So that well before his time, Paddy Desmond was unwittingly perhaps exemplifying something which many historians would now regard as an important principle, namely that all history, well, maybe most history, is local history. Because it's only at the local level, really, that you can evoke that revival of the imagination, which is essential to recreating what happened in the past. And only at the local level can you assemble enough convincing detail to drive it to the conclusion, yes, this is true. Whatever else is vague about the national level, this is true about this incident. So he certainly made a lasting impression on me. Thank you. So I want to say, of course, as I maybe have said before, that I'm pleased that Connie Foley praised my attachment to my native town. There's a song written about Ballyvourna which says, Agus gan is dam Valagukush for Kjonas kluar for inche fall. Is ni reged faste on grå råg lusan the Ballyvourna gavai me boss. Well, if we can say it about Ballyvourna, as we say in Latin, a 40 ori, we can say it about Macroom. The Valavakroma gavai me boss. And sometimes I used to describe myself when I was abroad as an East Slavenian, if only to confuse people. Americans would ask me, you're from Ireland. What part of Ireland? Well, I'd say I'm an East Slavenian, being a native of the townland of Slavian East. But they say, but you look so Irish. And in all this matter of local attachment and local pride, I'm reminded of a story by the American humorist O. Henry, who tells about the loudmouth in a bar in New York, who was boring his fellow drinkers by urging them to think big, to think global, think cosmopolitan. Don't mind your petty localities and so on. Rise above that. That's the way the world is going. And later on in the night, they were surprised to see him emerging from the gents, dishevelled and bloody, and angrily complaining, that guy insulted my native town. And I like to think that beneath all cosmopolitans, there's something of that local attachment as well. In my youth, education beyond the primary school was a privilege of a minority. Because among our elders and betters, there was the lingering 19th century mentality that somehow one should not be educated beyond one's station in life, which is a characteristic phrase of the period. And that attitude was English Victorian, but it was also Irish Catholic. You should only get the measure of education really that would suit you for your position in life. Anything beyond that, you might start getting notions. And you know, that attitude worked particularly against women. Oh, I'd say well into the middle of the 20th century. Why should you waste money on educating women at university level when they're going to get married anyway? But it applied to the general population at this earlier period because people in authority knew very well how subversive education could be, which is why they wanted to control it. They were right from their viewpoint, they were right to stick to, as far as they could, to their, if you like, level of control of education. Because education is freedom. When Thomas Davis enunciated his principle, educate that you may be free, he was thinking of political freedom, separation from England. But it is a very true principle in the broadest sense. Education is freedom. It's freedom from inferiority complex. It's freedom from insecurity. It's freedom from credulous beliefs and so on. And education is power. And we might adapt Voltaire's caustic dictum, once the people are educated, all is lost. And that was the fear of those who controlled our destinies when I was a small boy. My schooling began as indoctrination, but it ended as liberation. And today we can totally rejoice that the goal of higher education for all who wish it is rapidly on the way to being achieved. But it has to be said that we were fortunate in Macroom in having a very high quality of secondary education available to us, and also available to us virtually for free. Fee paying was the rule then, of course, but no one was turned away because they couldn't pay the fee. And as I said earlier, it would be invidious and pointless to list all the teachers I remember, but I was one of countless students who were indebted for life to these gifted and dedicated people, both brothers and laymen. Since I was told that I would be made a Freeman in Macroom, I fell to speculating what it might mean. There were a lot of facetious questions from friends of mine, as you know, would I be able to graze my sheep on the golf course, and so on, because the freedom of a city had these specific origins, but in our time it has come to mean simply the mark of esteem that your fellow citizens hold you in, that they confer upon you this honor. And however, we'd put in one side any practical applications the freedom of Macroom has. Age impairs many faculties, but my imagination runs riot from time to time. Doesn't mean I can have free parking out there by the monument, or on presentation of the scroll that I can get free quarters and free drink and free this and that. But I won't push my luck on that regard. Do I deserve it? I don't know. Even if I didn't deserve it, I'd still take it. Because I have no time for false modesty whatsoever. But the award has made me reflect on the significance of my life and career, if it has any significance. I suppose I've been described frequently as a revisionist historian. In my view, that is a nonsense, because all historians have to revise all the time anyway. But what they mean is that I somehow owe an obligation to use history in the service of nationalism or religion or something else. The historian has no duty and no obligation to any ism except to investigate the past as far as he can and teach it as faithfully as he can. And in a way, that continued throughout the early part of my career, that debate about revisionism. I suppose it's over now, but I did participate in that debate, and I did try to convey in my teachings and writings that history is about the independent investigation of the past and is not to be enrolled in any other service. In public life, from the 1970s to the 1990s, in and out of Shannon, where I had the privilege to serve, I suppose I tried to promote distinctive and independent views about various aspects of Irish life. And I hope I made a contribution to the formation of public opinion on such issues as Northern Ireland, the unacceptability of terrorism conducted in our name, the need to disentangle the meshed threads of our packaged heritage. By that I mean that growing up for us, faith in fatherland was the inherited package. You accepted it or you rejected it. Well, I can't realize that you do neither, that you have to disentangle bits of it. You have to separate. If Ireland was to live in peace and in brotherhood with any prospect of a national unity overall, then you had to disintegrate. You had to separate out language from nationalism. You had to put an end to the idea that you spoke Irish because it was your patriotic duty to do so. No, you spoke Irish because it was your ancestral heritage. You had to put an end to the pernicious doctrine that if you were a nationalist, violence was okay. No, it is not okay. And so on. And to separate churches from state, physical force from nationalism. And that was all part of what I suppose I felt and that I was trying to promote. Improve British-Irish relations, an independent voice in foreign policy, and the formation of a liberal secular framework for our law. Now, I had the freedom to do that, fortunately, rare enough in that I was independent, I had academic independence, and I could say what I liked, which was a great feeling. Some of the issues on which I stood have been resolved. Others are being resolved. The debate has moved on and yet more, and I have moved on as well. And I've changed my views from time to time. But at the same time, it's a matter of great satisfaction to know that on certain issues, the views I was putting forward as a minority view are now, some of them at least, being accepted as common sense and natural. So I was able to achieve that great satisfaction of championing a lost cause and feeling virtuous about that, and then living to see that cause becoming accepted and feeling smug about that. So I had the best of both worlds, as it were. But Macroom Town Council, like Voltaire, isn't really concerned about whether I was right or wrong. For them, like Voltaire, they would defend my right to take the stances I have taken. And they were happy enough with the general thrust of what I was doing to honour me like this tonight. And that's enough for me to know. T.C. Murray, in his autobiographical novel Spring Horizon, depicts a young boy in Carrickmore, a country town, Carrickmore, growing up and reacting to all kinds of influences in this country town. Carrickmore, of course, is Macroom. And Murray's hero, young hero, Stephen Mangan, is Murray himself. And the novel is thinly disguised, but instantly recognizable. He puts different names in the different streets and so on. But it is undoubtedly Macroom. And it is a remarkable sensation it was a remarkable sensation for me to read that novel when I was maybe 13 or 14 and to put myself in his position and to see the town through his eyes. He, for example, memorably described how he is particularly attached to the Ashling River, which of course is the Salon. And every day he makes his way from the school in the old school lane, which subsequently was called Danzig. I don't know what it's called now, but the school lane was down there. And he came there and made his slow way up through the town, pausing to look on things that interested him, and then down Castle Street, and then pause on the bridge to look up at his river, upstream at his river, and admire the view. And this is where I'm going to ask you another reminder. Wasn't it Larry McNamara said something famous about the view from the bridge? He said the view from the Salon.
The second finest view in the British Isles after the Y at Worcester Castle.
After the white what?
After the Y,
At-
over Y, at Worcester Castle.
So Larry McNamara, well-known character in the town, but very, very learned person indeed, used to share the fictional Stephen Mangan's admiration for the view upstream at the Salon. My brother Tigers reminded me, it was the second finest view in the British Isles after the view of the Y, is it, from Worcester Castle. So there you have a real-life man, Macrompian to the core, admiring the splendid view, and we matched that with the fictional Stephen Mangan, who was, of course, really T.C. Murray, admiring the same view. And thus, the kind of combination of life and literature is fascinating in this town. And it was the same town, really, that I knew, that T.C. Murray knew. His adolescence was in the late 1880s. Mine was in the early 1940s, the mid-1940s perhaps. And the town hadn't changed all that much from his time, socially and culturally, I mean. Politically, of course, we had moved to independence. But as regards everyday living, I would think the Macroom of the 1880s was very much like the Macroom of the 1940s. Perhaps the big change that he would have noticed after his time was the transference of the castle domain to the hands of the townspeople. For him, for young Stephen Manningham, the castle domain was forbidding and forbidden, closed off territory. But if T.C. Murray's Macroom and my Macroom were roughly the same, the town now has changed beyond recognition. Well, not quite beyond recognition, but it has changed enormously and indisputably for the better from my boyhood days. I'm a great believer in linear progress. I know it's supposed to be smug and Victorian to believe that things get better and better all the time. But they have got immensely better since my boyhood, and certainly in the town of Macroom. Gone are the laneway slums, the hemorrhage of immigration, the more blatant forms of snobbery and social discrimination, I hope. Gone too is rank poverty. I remember the smell of poverty in the side aisle, popularly and accurately called the poor side, at Sunday Mass in Macroom. Macroom is now prosperous, it is sophisticated, and T.C. Murray, our most famous son, would be proud of the town and of the Briery Gap, indeed named in his honour. And it is plain from the weekly press, County Supplement of the Examiner, or the Corkman, it is plain that Macrompians care for their elderly, for their poor, for the sick and disabled, for the environment, and for the built heritage. And people talk a lot today about the selfishness of the Celtic Tiger generation, that people now will not do anything if they don't get paid for it. But that's patently untrue. Towns like Macroom all over Ireland have numerous examples of volunteers, of people giving of their spare time for the good of their fellow citizens. And that's certainly true of this town. problems and opportunities, as you councillors know very well. There are various important issues that you have to deal with. Building growth, the new phenomenon of immigration, traffic and commuting patterns, the need to retain the retail economy in a town like Macroom, which is so close to Cork, and in general, the need to avoid slipping into the status of a dormitory town. I'd imagine that is the greatest single challenge. So there is a challenge then to retain the vibrant, distinctive character of a friendly and hospitable West Cork town, because even though distance and travel have shortened immensely, and we're only a half an hour from the city, it is still a West Cork town. Despite what geography says, and despite what electoral constituencies say, the spirit of this town has always been that of a West Cork town. And I hope it continues like that, and that you cherish your rich heritage. Again, I am enormously grateful for the honour you have conferred on me. Gurmia Mahagwith, Gomarig Macroom, a bio, up Macroom, Vivat Macromia Emporium Muscrie.
Before we let John A. go, the Mayor read a description there outlining a few different traits that John A. has. The last quality ascribed to him was as a singer. And the last couple of words in that quote is, especially a singer. So, before we leave here this evening, we'll ask John A. to give us a couple of bars, I think.
Well, I'd like to sing my favourite Macroom song. And I'll dispense with the usual apologies that my voice is not as good as it used to be, because if I say that, inevitably there'll be some at the back of the hall saying, it never was as good as it used to. It was early one fine harvest evening that I strayed by the banks of Ceylon, for to gaze on such beauties of nature as grace every woodland and bourne. The prospect was surely enchanting, as gay lassies in juvenile plume promenaded by the banks of the river that flows down by the town of Macroom. I'm sorry. I, being airy and fond of recreation, to the river I ventured to go, until tired of my wanderings and rovings, I sat myself down by a grove. I sat there some time meditating, till the sun his bright rays had withdrawn, when a damsel of queenly appearance came down by the banks of Ceylon. Well, I rose up in joy and amazement, and accosted this damsel so fair, for to me she appeared like a Venus, adorned with jewels so rare. Were I ruler of France or of Prussia, sure 'tis with me you'd soon wear the crown, and I'd join you in wedlock, my darling. You're the beauty of sweet Macedon. Well, we talked and we walked on together, inhaling the sweet pleasant air, till at length in a voice so alarmed, she said, "Sir, my father goes there. His presence to me was appalling, with his cross, angry look and wild frown, which pierced my heart like an arrow on my way back to sweet Massey town. Ah, but now I'm retired from my roving, with a heart full of sorrow and grief, and there's no one on earth to console me or afford me the slightest relief. I will roam the wild African desert until death calls me to my tomb, for the sake of that charming fair Helen that I met near the town of Macroom.
Not easy fellow that knows it. Well done. That concludes our business for the evening. I wish to declare this special meeting of Macroom Town Council closed, and I would ask you all now if you would come down to the Castle Hotel with us and join us for a little refreshment, a little drink, and we might get another bar or a Johnny as well in here. Good night and thank you all.
He's a fine footballer. He was. He's a problem. Meet Thomas Fisher. He can be proud.
I'm elected now.
Very serious.
Yes, it's very good, all right.
If this gets out, they're getting him back at last. And yet he was kind of